back. Well, family, friends and colleagues have all bid farewell to one of the country's most treasured icons, at least of our time. Dr. Don Mattera passed away on Monday and was buried later in the day in line with Muslim rites. People from all walks of life describing Dr. Don as an icon who made a significant impact on the lives of those he touched through his work. So this morning we speak to a person who was close friends with Mattera for close on 50 years, and that's Dr. Saths Cooper, who joins us via our video link this morning. Dr. Cooper, let me take the opportunity to also convey my condolences to you. A 50-year friendship is nothing to sniff at.
Yes, it's been a long walk. It's been one peppered with highs and lows. But I met Don when he was PRO of the Labour Party. And we had a very taut engagement about the Labour Party and ethnic politics. And I was PRO of the Black People's Convention. So I engaged him on that, and it was quite testy, but nevertheless, from that point, Don moved to embracing all blacks, so whether they were described as colored, Indian, African. And we worked together in 1973 when the spate of bannings against black consciousness activists happened. He was also one of those who was impacted later by banning orders and put paid to his journalism career, because he was a journalist and couldn't work for quite a while in journalism, and did what he did best, and that was write his poetry, which could not be published, of course, at that time. But that was the kind of person that Don was. He held his own, but also was open to other influences, and like most people at that time, was influenced by what Nelson Mandela called that felt fire that swept the country in the 70s, and without which we probably would not be sitting here speaking with open airwaves right now.
The issue of ethnic politics was something that was quite close to Don Mattera's heart. Well, he spoke quite vehemently around issues of ethnic politics. Dr. Cooper, I spoke to him maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and he was incredibly angry about a number of things happening in the country. If we look at some of his poetry, there is certainly a sense that he didn't have the kind of closure on the issues facing our country that he really hoped for in his later years.
I think, like most of us, there was a colossal sense of betrayal by what has been happening, where there were self-serving political interests, politicians, mediocre ones at that, who've risen to the top and who have taken our country and our people for granted. The mantra that we liberated you, whereas in reality, South Africans played a significant role in bringing an end to the erstwhile apartheid system. But the apartheid of the mind has continued, and narrow ethnicity plays itself out for well over 25 years now, since the advent of democracy, actually. There's probably more ethnic engagement than ever before. That narrow bigotry, that racism, that othering that he was impacted by, felt very strongly against, because in a true sense, Don Brazinga was an African. He was a son of the soil, where over 96% of the world's population can trace their origins to the Komani San of the southern Kalahari bordering our country, Namibia and Botswana. And he really felt that we were going in a direction that was destroying our common humanity, that we weren't building the bridges, we weren't getting to understand one another better because of that identity politics, if you like.
I've been reading a lot of his poetry again, just in the wake of his passing, as I'm sure many people have done around the country. And he really had such an incredible way with words. My co-anchor Ayanda Nyati talks about the ability for words to live on. And that certainly, if we look at some of his work, Don Mattera's work, that certainly is what can be said for his work. This poem, Remember, there's a line here where he says, if I crumble to dust again, it will only be the bliss of a long-awaited dream that bids me to rest when freedom finally walks the land.
You know, he really was in angst that the fact of freedom didn't really hit us, because we tend to think we're free, but our minds are shackled by the past. We are caught up in kinds of issues that we shouldn't be caught up. We're not engaging as human beings. And he was one who stood very firmly against the word non-white, for instance. He believed that we were all people who need to be affirmed, that if you removed the term white from the term non-white, you are nothing, nihil, a negative. And he fought that with all his being. From black consciousness into the Africanism that he embraced, he believed that we need to reflect togetherness, that we are all people. Our biology is the same, and yet that all around us we reflect what is essentially an apartheid divisive concept. Race classification is with us, and it was a construct created by the colonials, refined during apartheid, and which in democracy we still use to divide ourselves. That really hurt him. But as a poet, as a writer, he was superb. He trained, I would imagine, hundreds of journalists in newsrooms everywhere in the country, people who have risen to the heights in journalism, and yet we still have not found one another in this country. And that, to his end, was something that he lamented. Hope that we take his legacy forward, read his words at low times and at high, and get inspiration to do better than that which we see of destruction all around us.
I mean, it's like he sort of looked into the future and knew that he would die before we attained real freedom, at least in his lifetime. Again, that poem, Remember, where he says, remember to call at my grave when freedom finally walks the land. Dr. Saths Cooper, I want to thank you for your time, unless you have a closing comment.
No, I think we can do better than that which Don really was affected by. And I think that he is somebody who was really the poet laureate of the southern tip of Africa.
Absolutely. Dr. Saths Cooper, once again, a long-time friend of Don Mattera's, joining us there, reflecting on his life. Thanks very much indeed for your time.